service is about to begin. We ask that you please silence your cell phones. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist congregation in the South Jersey Shore, a welcoming and inclusive faith community. We'd like to welcome any guests you have today. Thank you for taking a chance to join us for worship. We welcome those watching virtually today, and we welcome your comments online. My name is Julia Utts, and I am your worship associate this morning. I grew up in this conversation and completed the RA program several years ago. Our worship service today is led by Paul Utts, a founding member of this congregation and lifetime UU who has served as president, RE teacher, and in numerous different roles. He is currently vice president of the congregation. Video of today's service will be available on our YouTube channel later today. If you care to tweet during today's service, you can use the hashtag UUCSJS. Welcome to worship. Welcome into this place of healing. Welcome into this place of challenge and of growth. Welcome into this place of imperfection and aspiration. You are whole, you are holy, you are wholly loved. Our chalice later today is my Aunt Marcia. Please read with me the chalice lighting words, which are in your order of service. The chalice lit among us is a beacon of hope in a world of crisis, a beacon of possibility made manifest in community, a beacon of warmth through our interconnections, a beacon of light illuminating our shared wisdom, a beacon of connection by our being together. Please rise now in body or spirit to sing our gathering hymn, Where Do We Come From?, the words of which are in your order of service.
Okay, it's been a while since we've done a round. We're going to break this into 3 parts. We're going to take roughly this here as part 1. That is part 2, and we're going to really count on you over there, part 3. This is Miriam. Most of us know this hymn, but Miriam's new to this hymn. So we're going to do it in 3 parts. We're going to go through it twice. And
well, we're going to sing the, is this Michael? Yeah. We're going to sing it once as a choir, then we'll sing it once with the whole congregation, and then we're going to sing it twice as a round.
I see. Okay, very good. So 4 times total. We're going to start.
4 times. It goes quickly.
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? This side, come on now. Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we? Where are we going? Where are we going? Where are we going? Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come? Where are we going? Mystery, Thanks, everybody.
I don't think so.
We will now light the religious education lantern. spirit of prayer, blessed and holy creation, universal wonder, mystery beyond definition, we share today our joys and sorrows, placing stones that make ripples in water and glimmer, but in the light of our chalice. Our hearts are touched by this shared ritual, and we are connected. We hold in our hearts this morning the children all over the world, but especially those who have been paying attention and are looking to us for answers. We pray for the people of Uvalde that they find a way to reconcile their incomprehensible grief. We pray for those who are apart from us, whether by distance, time, or conflict unresolved. We pray for those who thirst, whether for water, dignity, or justice. We pray for our small, blue, fragile planet. We offer all of these and those joys and concerns that remain unspoken in our hearts into the care of the universe. May our joys be multiplied and our sorrows diminished in this sharing. Amen. Every week we take up an offering during our service. Every week, we take up an offering during our service. It's good to remind ourselves from time to time that the offering is symbolic as well as practical. We know that it is through pledges that we build our budget and fund our yearly programs and ministries of worship and religious education, pay our staff and professional religious leaders, and finance the comfort and beauty of our building. You can also text a donation to 609-293-4495, or if you are using the electronic order of service, follow the link to donate online. For those who are participating online, please visit uucsjs.org and click on the yellow donate button for ways to donate. Our offering says that the act of giving is as essential to our spiritual well-being as anything else we do here on Sunday mornings. The morning offering will now be given and received in the spirit of grateful fellowship.
First, I just want to start out by saying I'm so happy my daughter agreed to be our worship associate today. She hasn't been here for some time, which is very common in our faith. We have them through RE, they go off to college, and they desert us until they have children of their own. Up here is a picture, actually, of my daughter and I giving a presentation in front of our congregation with our first minister, Reverend Dottie Stone, circa 2000. So it's 8 years old. She was already up here participating in the service. Thank you, honey. Where did we come from? Who are we? And where are we going? As in hymn many of us know, we just sang, invoking the three questions that are at the heart of most religions. For that matter, a good deal of scientific inquiry. I mean, right now, there's a $10 billion Webb telescope a million miles from Earth trying to answer the question of where we came from. But while we all ponder these questions on an existential level, at some point, the more immediate question is, especially in this time of transition, how do they apply to UC SJS? Today, I want to talk to you about where we came from, and then examine with you who we are and where do we go from here. I think where we came from, or our origin story, if you will, helps determine who we are, and given identifying that, perhaps we can plan where we're going, using the knowledge gained from experience to provide greater insight into future choices. With apologies to those who attended the newcomers luncheon last week, I'm going to go over our history, much of which they already heard the abbreviated version of. We began in 1998, when the Unitarian Universalist Association in Boston decided perhaps the best way to spread our message and grow our faith is to fund small startup congregations in areas where there are none, but might be interested. There had been a UU fellowship here in the 1970s, but it failed due to lack of interest. They tasked a guy named Bob Johnson, a former community organizer, who met with 8 people to discuss a plan to fund 3 public meetings, along with some advertising, to see if there was any interest in the idea in this area. In July of 1998, the first public meeting was held at Reed's Avenue School here in Galloway. Helen, my wife, had visited Cherry Hill UU with my sister Marcia, and they had signed a guest book. So we got a call from that guest book, hey, how about attending that meeting? Which, of course, we had to be looking for religious education for our children at the time. We couldn't believe our luck that a UU congregation was starting up here. It was reasonably well attended, and much like our newcomer gathering, we put a chalice, we took turns telling our religious journey, we sang a song, and we agreed to meet again. There were 2 more public meetings that year, one in Mays Landing and one in Summers Point at the Jordan Road School. A core group of those showing interest developed, and with Bob Johnson's help and a grant from the UUA, we held our first service at Jordan Road School in Summers Point on February 14th, 1999. Valentine's Day, we had our first service. This is UUC SJS's first miracle, that the UUA chose this area to start a congregation. And I can tell you personally, just when we needed it. The room was full, and children's RE was in a gymnasium. And a guy named Dr. Patrick O'Neill from Wilmington delivered that first service. But each week, a different minister would come and deliver their best of sermon in a room full of people. During this first year, that core group developed what's called a steering committee, an early board of directors. And we went through the process of choosing our first minister, Reverend Dottie Stone, a retired school teacher, and who was assigned and mostly paid for by the UUA. Again, there's a picture up here of Dottie Stone standing behind us. What we thought was a wonderful article written about us and our welcoming ways in the press of Atlantic City. The article highlighted our welcoming of the LGBT community. And while we were delighted with the story, the Summers Point School Board was not. We were told it was a violation of church and state, and that we had to find another place to meet. Now understand, the school was not an ideal meeting place. We had no place to store anything, so each week people were tasked with bringing hymnals, coffee supplies, and RE was in a noisy gym. We were essentially church in a box. But nonetheless, no one likes being kicked out because of the principles, and worse, within a month after we left, a fundamentalist group was meeting in the same school. That's the second miracle, getting kicked out. It helped solidify a community that was doing a lot of work each week, and it helped keep our group together. We found a new place to meet, the Jewish Community Center in Margate. Reverend Stone was our minister, and we were going in. The JCC was headed for some reservations. and that we couldn't stay long. So we started looking for a place to buy. After service, we would go house hunting. Never mind that we didn't have any money. We looked at a pizza parlor in Summers Point, dance studio in Mays Landing, a house in Galloway that had a pool, along with many other places. In February of 2000, we met at the Presbyterian Church in Pleasantville and were officially recognized by the UUA as the Unitarian Universalist congregation of the South Jersey Shore. You know, we thought for a while we'd shorten the name down to Pinelands Unitarian Universalist Congregation, but the acronym is PUKE, and nobody really liked it. So we stuck with UCSJS. The picture in the library is of that original group on Charter Sunday. When you hear people say they're a charter member, they're referring to that service. New members signed the book at that time, the same as new members sign that very same book now. My mother was in attendance and quite happy that her daughter Marcia and me and her grandchildren were involved in the faith she chose for us as children. She died a few days later, and as grief-stricken as we were, the benefits of having a faith community, not just to celebrate with, but to grieve with, was brought home. I think not just to my family, but the whole community, as they helped us to grieve and provide a life celebration. We came for our children to get a religious education, but that really nailed it for us that this community was important to us. It was another shared experience that helped bind this community together. During the search for a home, we had moved once again to next door Jewish Federation building, a beautiful building with a small auditorium, and children's already met in the kitchen around the counter, and we had to be quiet because the service was right in the next room. There was $1 toll each way to get to service, and our ranks were shrinking. Helen and I would go on vacation, and Helen, remembering what Betsy had told her about the fellowship in the 70s, would breathe a sigh of relief when we returned and the congregation was still here. The early momentum was dying. Our decreasing grant from the UUA was coming to an end, and a hard-working group was getting burnt out. Reverend Dottie Stone decided to resign, and an early member who was ordained in the United Church of Christ, Reverend George Blair III, was contracted to be our worship leader on a part-time basis. A member, John Loma, found a lot in Galloway that he thought might meet our needs near the rear entrance of Stockton. It was $60,000 for 6.2 acres in the Pinelands. $60,000 we didn't have. But a member stepped forward and loaned us $60,000. And in 2003, we bought this land. Reverend George led us through a land dedication, and we had a luncheon afterwards up the street at the Catholic Campus Ministry. The space was so nice, and the priest was open to letting us meet there going forward, since they didn't use the space on Sunday mornings. So in March of 2004, we started meeting at the Newman Center right up the street. This was UCSJS's third miracle, that not only did we find land, and a member loaned us a considerable sum to buy it, but in the process, we found a place to meet nearby. Reverend George Blair was a community theater actor and very entertaining and dynamic in the pulpit. We had regular services up the street, and once again, we started to grow. We started to look for an architect to build our own place, thinking, $150 to $200 per square foot, residential building costs. We could probably build a suitable structure for about $250,000. We had a builder in the congregation, a guy named Chris Holliday, who was on the board at the time, and he and John Loma worked really hard to find a way for us to be able to afford a building that would be environmentally friendly. We would need Pineland's approval, and it soon became apparent that the building would cost close to $1 million, and we only had a few thousand in our building fund. We brought in a fundraising professional to meet with each member of the congregation and gauge what we thought we could raise in our first capital campaign. Many of us, including me, were not from a faith tradition, and after getting over the reality of needing to pledge to an operating budget, now had to adjust to the idea that we needed an additional pledge to build a building. Nothing scares people away like talking about money. But we held our first capital campaign in 2005, and we exceeded our goal of $275,000. To me, I never imagined such generosity, and count exceeding the goal as UCSJS's fourth miracle. Pinelands told us we could only cover 5% of our 6.2 acres with impervious surface, and that would include the parking lot. Plus, we needed to do a survey for threatened species. Here we were, an environmental church that had to do a survey for threatened species. One was red-headed woodpeckers, but we had an ornithologist in the congregation at the time, and he certified that there were no endangered birds here. But we also had to do a study for northern pine snakes. That would cost $13,000, but we found somebody who would do it for $7,000 because his doctoral student volunteered his time. And while this was going on, they were ripping up hundreds of acres of trees right across the street to build the dormitories and the buildings and the parking lots you see over there now. I was sure, with all these drift nets set up across our land, that the pine snakes would be driven across into our nets and we wouldn't be allowed to build our church. So that's UCSJS's fifth miracle, if you're keeping track. No snakes. And then things really started to fall away. In 2005, Cynthia and Richard Javinsky joined our congregation, bringing not only a passion for social justice, but Richard was an engineer and had built churches. We hired an engineering firm to negotiate an extra 2.5% of land coverage, making it possible to have a slightly larger building and more parking. But it did require us to build a basement, adding to our costs. We had not, plus, we got the extra approval because we planned on building an energy-efficient, green building, and that commitment would only grow. All the while, children's RE was growing, and in fact, occasionally, we would threaten our children if they were misbehaving, that they wouldn't be allowed to go to church if they didn't misbehave. That's how fond they had become of this community. In November of 2006, we were planning our second annual service auction. I don't know what we're up to now, 18 or so. The next morning, a service entitled From Fundamentalism to Freedom by a guy named Mark Adams from an organization called Heartstrong. Mark was an advocate for LGBT students in religious schools. Well, there was a nice article published about it in the Current, and a local Knights of Columbus read the article, and I received a call from the Camden Diocese on a Friday night before our service auction that we could hold the service auction, but we had to vacate the building immediately and completely afterwards. We would not be allowed to have Sunday service, and for the second time, we were being kicked out of our meeting space because we supported LGBT rights. By coincidence, that Friday night, it happened to be an attorney's friend's house, Carol Roloff. She reached out to a judge, and after several calls, we were given 90 days to vacate the campus ministry. Sunday morning speaker, ironically, was today, and that service never didn't occur until much later, across the street at Stockton. So we would be homeless again in another 90 days, and the search for a new meeting space ensued. Betsy found the Lions Center for the Blind on Pitney Road. It had a large room for Sunday service, and children's RE met in the bar. Children's RE at this point had met in a gymnasium, a kitchen, a small prayer room where we covered a crucifix each week, and a hallway, and now a bar. We started meeting there in February of 2007. Kicked out, brought a new energy and enthusiasm to our congregation. We hired an architect, and several members of our congregation were donating their time in all aspects of planning. We applied for all the permits, but we also saw that costs were escalating. We received a grant from Charles Letters, and members were very generous. I mean, we continued not only to collect on the first capital campaign, but we were also funding our operating budget. That May of 2007, we had a contract dispute with our minister, George Blair, and we let him go. It was a shock to the congregation. It was very destabilizing. We lost some members and almost lost some others. Diversity, though, was a great teacher, and we weathered that storm, and we did come out stronger on the other side. By the close of 2007, we had all our approvals to build in place, but we needed more money. We didn't originally expect to pay for an elevator or $75,000 or the 2 fire-rated exits that cost $25,000 each, I think it was. We were not in a great position to get a loan, and we exceeded, even though our first campaign exceeded a goal of $300,000, we needed more money. So we took a vote, the congregation voted unanimously to raise another $200,000. We knew we would need even more, but with that kind of equity in the building, we figured we could get a loan. November 18th of 2007, a small clearing was made in the trees and the brush where we now sit, and we held a groundbreaking service. Almost a decade from our first public meeting, we were starting to build a permanent home. By December, we had raised another $242,000, thanks to a very generous congregation, many friends, John C. Wright's hard work, and the hard work of many others. Miracle 6. We had raised over $500,000 and had a hard-working team building a commercial building. 2008 would see a flurry of activity, building our new, very green home. So many people chipped in their time and talent. The goal was to try to complete the building in time to avoid a property tax payment. To do that, we would have to have our first service in the building before October 1st. The effort to use environmentally friendly materials and minimize waste and recycle, well, it bordered on excessive. Every tree ripped out was recycled. And by the end of 8 months of construction of a commercial building, we only had one small dumpster of waste. Well, one group was building the building, another group was planting the lawn, controlling erosion, planting our native plantscaping. Yet another was tasked with finding us part-time contract administrator. The contract administrator is one hired by the board, usually for a specific length of time. In the last days of September, a temporary certificate of occupancy from Galloway Township in hand, our newly hired minister, Rosemary Newberry, led us through a dance of gratitude so we could say that we had a service and beat the deadline for a property tax payment. By the end of October 2008, we moved into our new building. Never mind, we didn't have chairs. It was an incredible effort for many people, and we had bought the land in 2003, so it took us 5 years to complete the process. So many things had to go right in order to make that happen. In February 15th of 2009, the 10th anniversary of our first service, we had a dedication service for our new building. In June, we dismissed Reverend Newberry. We went through a congregational process this time to make sure the decision was the right one. Jim Gentile was our next board president, and a committee was formed to find a new interim minister. Everyone rolled up their sleeves to get us here. Members of the congregation loaned us hundreds of thousands of dollars so we could finish the building and apply for a mortgage. We all worked so hard. The sweat and DNA of Richard Javinsky, Bob Gillis, and Arlene Yaka, Charlie Roberts are in these walls. The sense of us all coming together and completing the UU Center was a shared experience that truly strengthened our beloved community. We were now house poor, however, with a large mortgage to pay and somewhat burned out from the intense effort of so many. We spent so much time and energy looking inward to finish the building. We all took a deep breath and now look to fill the building with activities and hopefully a full-time minister. We hired a contract minister, Charlie Dietrich. There are 3 types of UU ministers: a contract minister hired by the board and dismissed by the board, an interim minister who's hired for a specific length of time, 1 or 2 years, and usually with a specific purpose, and then a called minister, DC. Reverend DC was our first called minister. But the new mortgage now made it difficult to hire a full-time minister. We had been functioning with half-time ministry, but as any minister will tell you, ministry is typically a full-time job, regardless of what you're getting paid for. All during this time, we had excellent Sunday services. Barbara provided us with wonderful music and special programs. We had our RE director before Jess, Heidi, provided a wonderful RE program that was well attended. There was probably at least 25 kids, and by all accounts, meaningful to both students and parents. We continued to meet our operating budget, and were able to throw an ordination celebration for Charlie, who was new to ministry and much loved. But halftime couldn't sustain him, and he moved on, and once again, leaving us to find a minister. Charlie was our 3rd inexperienced minister. So in order to explore calling a minister, our next 2 ministers were interim ministers, trained to help shepherd our congregation toward the goal of calling our first minister. Part of that process was to have a congregational survey to help us figure out who we are. This was done through a survey in 2015, which with the pandemic seems like forever ago, and it confirmed much of what we already knew. During this time, Cynthia Kane, our first interim minister, helped us to adopt the Black Lives Matter position, and with Michael Cluck's help, led us through exercises to explore white privilege and systemic racism. Some of our members left after the sign was posted, not because they didn't support the cause, but because after a shooting in a UU church in Tennessee, felt that we were stirring up hatred in a typically red neighborhood that could threaten our safety. And sure enough, the sign was vandalized several times, and a couple of threats received on our film. In response, we set up cameras, which were stolen. And some members of the men group would stand outside with walkie-talkies, and the children would practice sheltering in place or exiting the building discreetly. Once again, being persecuted for our stand on a social justice issue brought us together and stiffened our resolve. Lukewarm support for the BLM sign in the beginning increased as a result of those threats. John Marsh would be our next interim minister. His gentle touch guided us through the search process that led us to our last minister being called, Reverend Dawn, now D.C. Fortune. In Reverend D.C., the search committee saw a person who, even though life had frequently been a struggle, kept working at different professions to find one that fit. But we did not heed the lessons of the past. And partly because only a few ministers applied, because we are relatively remote and we were only offering half-time, we called Reverend D.C., another inexperienced minister, to shepherd us forward. In the beginning, D.C. delivered excellent sermons, and it looked like we could finally start building our community to the next level. Well, this was happening. A connection forged by Reverend King with Atlantic City AME created a ministry to help feed people in Atlantic City. The men's group embraced the opportunity to do something meaningful, and several of us pitched in and found the work very gratifying. But not only did our Reverend never show up to help, or even praise, their sermons grew darker, with blaming and shaming becoming a fairly common theme. Active leading members grumbled at first, several key members left. Then the pandemic hit. We started to meet via Zoom, doing the best we could to engage members and keep together, and in fact found that some friends and former members reconnected via Zoom, and that laid the groundwork for our current project of improving our AV system so we could both receive outside speakers and send out a quality streaming service. Sorry to you, those watching via the streaming now. It's going to get better, I promise. So here we are, still wearing masks, still not connecting with coffee hour, but we have a history, we have a building that's paid for, and an excellent staff to start again with way more than we had in 1999. So who are we? Well, we did that survey in 2015 when we were in search. And for most part, we are white, well-educated, politically active, especially when it comes to social justice. We appreciate a well-crafted service and enjoy either singing or listening to music. Most of us come from a Christian background, be it Catholic or Protestant. Many of us are straight, married, and women outnumber men almost 2 to 1. This is common faith-wide in the UUA, those demographics. We care about the environment, are very concerned about climate change, and seek a oneness with nature, the natural world. Many of us aren't concerned about life after death, and though most of us lean atheist, it's nice to think consciousness survives death. The tenets of Buddhism are also important to many of us here. So if we're not looking for a ticket to heaven, why are we here? Because we care about our planet and the living beings on it, including humans. So where do we go from here? Let's start from what we've learned from our history. First is that we value the loved community and have thrived when we have a common shared purpose. Whether it's building a building, opposition to war, systemic racism, or being green. We have had in our 22-plus year history 7 ministers, of which 4 were fresh out of seminary. Part of the reason we've hired the inexperienced is because we have thus far not been able to afford full-time ministry. Ministry is difficult enough without adding inexperience. It's difficult to shepherd a flock when you're trying to figure out who you are. And in the case of UUs, it's more like shepherding cats. I don't want to keep picking on DC, but after almost 5 years of service, DC proclaimed if we're moving our gay pride flag, their ministry had failed. Yet I would posit that after 5 years, a congregation that used to have a social justice committee and a strong history of social justice now has none, is a more glaring and telling failure. Although Reverend DC started with some fairly engaging services, during their tenure we had an exciting collaboration with the AME Church that I talked about earlier, where DC was not seen once. I asked DC if they had heard a well-attended Zoom service that I presented that called out divisive language used both here and by the UUA, and their answer is they didn't have time. Another member of the congregation presented a service and was told the same thing. If you are busy trying to figure out who you are, how can you be expected to help a congregation find their ministry? I'm using this again, not to pick on Reverend DC, but to point out that we have sold ourselves short by hiring inexperienced ministers. So my first takeaway advice is hold off on hiring a minister until we can support a full-time or nearly full-time experienced minister. None of the fresh out of seminaries have worked out well. Although this year's budget contains money for ministerial search, consider a savings account for a future search. Ministerial search costs money. In business, of course, and that's my background, we do something called a SWOT analysis. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. An example of a strength might be we have this wonderful green building and it's paid for. A weakness might be that we're sort of in the middle of nowhere. An opportunity might be that we have a few thousand energetic potential social justice advocates right across the street. A threat might be the overall decline in religion in our country. Another example of the strength is we have a loving, accepting community. A weakness is no one knows we're here. And there are currently very few children. An opportunity is that we have an incredible RE director, and the only place in the area where kids can get a dogma-free religious education. A threat might be that vandalism scares parents away. This new sound system, the beginning of a new audio-visual system, will allow us to do quality streaming. It will also eventually allow us to bring speakers from anywhere to stream into our sanctuary live, including concerts. This is a strength we can build on. A weakness is few parents know that we offer something unique here. As an opportunity, a relatively inexpensive mail campaign or social media campaign could potentially bring children along with their parents to enrich all of our lives. It just takes planning and a meaningful open house Sunday. We have talked for years about having an active campus ministry, but so far have been unable or unwilling to do the work to bring the students across the street. Think music and pizza on a Thursday night. Pleasantville has a growing Hispanic population. We have allies in caring and Eastern service workers that we've been working with. A stretch goal might be finding a way to service this community further. There is certainly a need. Former members are very active in the Go Green Galloway group, perhaps helping host speakers and educational events geared to like-minded environmentalists would bring new active members through the door. In closing, where we go from here depends on your willingness to get involved. The standard rule of any organization is the 80-20 rule, that 20% of the people do 80% of the work, and the other 20%, the other 20 of the work gets done by the remaining 80%. I can tell you for the first 10 years, 80% of the people were doing 80% of the work. We got a lot done, and we supported each other, working side by side. An experienced minister can help motivate a group to get involved and stay involved by sorting out individual and group passions and feeding them. Our goal, should not be a minister, but instead building a loving community that is doing good work, making a difference while feeding each other's minds and passions. We need to utilize our assets, this building and staff, and use that as a springboard to get things done and attract others who want to make a difference. To pay for a full-time minister, we need probably about 150 members. We're about 50 shy of that. Most of us aren't here to get into heaven. We're not here to convince those around us that we're worthy. We're here to feed our minds and our souls and enrich our lives, along with the lives of those around us. As our speaker last week used an analogy of the size of the rearview mirror compared to the windshield, we want to learn from the past, celebrate our accomplishments, but look to the future. So, where are we going? What will be UUC SGS's 7th miracle? I think we're going to make a difference. Amen. Go back up. I'll take this one. What number is it? As a quick aside, my wife handed me a hymnal this morning that she grabbed at random, and it's my mother's hymnal dedication to her deceased husband. Please rise as you're able to sing our closing hymn, number 360. Here we have gathered side by side, circle of kinship, come and stand inside. May all who seek here find a kindly word. May all who speak here feel they have been
I just want to say that I lived through that history, and even I didn't know some of the names. So I was very educational. I also forgot to mention, by now I suspect that many of you are wondering about this monitor in the front of the sanctuary. You did mention it. It's a piece of the equipment that we will be using to bring a different media to our Sunday services. To see more about what we'll be able to do upon fully upgrading our equipment, stay after the service for a demonstration by Kit Marlowe, our president. Let's read the words together for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. There are a few announcements for this week. We invite you to pick a Sunday and break fresh flowers and arrange them on our chalice table. Colby Tippett has prepared a sign-up sheet at the back of our sanctuary. Join us this Friday at 7 p.m. for our first Friday FUNN fun event. Outdoor movie, snacks, and fellowship. All ages are welcome. Are you looking for a way to process what is happening in our country after the recent events of violence? Are you wondering how to help each other not to become numb, or how to keep each other safe in our community? Yvette Guillermo McGahey and Teresa McReynolds invite you to a conversation to explore these questions and share your grief Thursday, June 2nd at 7 p.m. at the Convivier Wellness Hub in Hamilton. Notice is hereby given that the annual meeting of the UCSJS will be held June 2nd, 2022, immediately following the Sunday service, for the purposes of approving the budget for the 2022-2023 fiscal year, electing members of the Board of Trustees, Nominations Committee, Committee on Ministry, and Gift Endowment Committee, and transacting such other business as may come before the congregation. Members of the congregation may vote in one of three ways: by attending the meeting in person, by absentee ballot, which is made available upon request and must be received by the board secretary before the start of the annual meeting at 11:15 a.m. June 12th in order to be counted, or by proxy. A proxy letter signed by the absent member authorizes another member to vote on the absent member's behalf. Also, a reminder, come up to the front of the sanctuary to see a demonstration of our new equipment by Kit Marlowe. Join us next Sunday for a service led by our RE Director, Jessica Dunn-Sapanoff. What is a blessing? blessing? Is it as simple as what you say after a sneeze? There are blessings at the dinner table, counting your blessings, and saying things like, "You are a blessing." What do you think blessing means? Join us as we begin a month of celebrating blessings in this all-ages interactive service. We warmly welcome all of you who are visiting us today. If you are new to the congregation, please follow the link in the electronic order of service to complete a connection card so that we may get to know you better. Parents are encouraged to stay for the final moments of worship and to retrieve their children from outside/downstairs after the bell has sounded. Now, let us share in a moment of silent reflection to consider today's message and the meaning it has had in our